Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartout. Today, we are joined by MoreSteam's e-learning product manager, Brian Bross. Currently, Brian is a software engineer for MoreSteam, but he used to be an executive chef. Because Brian's background combines culinary skills and continuous improvement, he has a unique perspective on lean principles in the restaurant industry. Brian also knows how those lean principles can translate to other industries. We talk about all these things and more in today's episode. However, before I introduce Brian, I need to make a correction from our last episode. In the last episode, we talked about the joke writing contest at MoreSteam's Best Practices for Operational Excellence conference. At the dinner reception, each table was asked to work together to write a joke about continuous improvement. Some of the tables used AI to help them write jokes. Other tables did not use AI. I said I would find and share the winning joke, and here it is. Why did the statistician break up with the regression model? Because it had too many significant others, independent variables, and they were all highly correlated. There you go. He also said the winning joke was not produced with generative AI, it was written by people working together. I have since learned that the winning joke was indeed written by generative AI. The prompt was, tell me a joke about multiculinarity. I hope I said that right. Now, I was wrong. The winning joke was written by AI. AI beat people. One thing is for certain, there is no stopping AI. AI will soon be here. And I, for one, welcome our new AI overlords. Hey, it's Quality Time with MoreSteam. You might hear a reference to Simpson's Paradox or The Simpsons. Now, my conversation with Brian Bross. We are joined today by Brian Bross. Brian is the e-learning product manager here at MoreSteam. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. How long have you been with MoreSteam?
I started with the company in January of 2020, so it's been a little over 4 years, 4.5 years. And it's been a great ride.
I think one of the things that's interesting is exactly what brought you here. Not everyone comes through a traditional path to either continuous improvement or software development, and that would certainly be the case for you as well. Now, you were raised in the Cincinnati area, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And then you went to Ohio University to study what? Computer programming and?
Well, I started chemical engineering. I did about 3 years with that. And while I was enjoying the math and the science part of it, maybe the chemistry was a little bit different. So I switched it up and I finished with electrical and computer engineering.
Like I said, you did not have a traditional path. You did not go from taking computer engineering classes in college to being a professional computer engineer. You did something a little different, Brian.
I sure did. So I think my story starts a little bit earlier than my time at OU.
Okay.
I grew up cooking. My parents are both from rural parts of Kansas. And so in the suburbs of Cincinnati growing up, we would make dinner together every night. We did family dinners every night, which at the time as a child was kind of, all right, I'd rather be out playing with my friends. However, as I grew into it, I realized the tradition of that and the experience of that was really something that was special. So growing up cooking, and then I got to Ohio University and I immediately took a job in a diner. So I wanted to stay in the kitchens and I was really enjoying that.
You were like a short order cook?
There was a little bit of the short order cook, but it was a lot of just the repetitive. We're in a college town, so I bet you can imagine some of the orders that we were going through. A lot of pancakes, a lot of omelets, a lot of that get me through the next bar run kind of food. So we did a lot of that, had a ton of fun doing it, but I just really enjoyed the excitement and the adrenaline that would come from being busy in a kitchen where everything around you is sharp or hot. So you just assume that it's going to be busy and it's going to be hard. So working through the curriculum of the academic side of things, while challenging and rewarding, what I really found really got me going every morning was that time in the kitchen. So upon graduation from Ohio University, I pursued the culinary field.
And you actually went to culinary school, correct?
I did. So I had had a couple of jobs in restaurants by the time I had graduated from Ohio University. I moved out west to Seattle with a couple of friends, and they were working in Microsoft straight out of school and just kind of going through the grind. And I was like, I don't know if that's for me right now. I was cooking in the mornings, I was serving at nights, I was going mountain climbing up in the Pacific Northwest, I was out in the ocean. I was like, this is definitely the career path that I wanted to get into because I was enjoying every day of it. To take that career a little bit further, I started looking for culinary opportunities in the Pacific Northwest. So I really enjoyed that scene. And I found a Western Culinary Institute, the Le Cordon Bleu School in Portland, Oregon. And that was a much
Yeah.
simpler move from Seattle to Portland. So I did that. And I went to a culinary school in Portland, Oregon.
And from there, you became a chef, an executive chef at trendy restaurants, at cool organizations.
Yeah.
That must have been really, I mean, you were creating menus.
For sure. We did a lot of great things. I did a lot of great things through the career. So I did some catering. I did a bunch of restaurants. I did a lot of the bar foods. That was an easy entry level to get into. One of the most exciting times was about 9 months spent in New York City. I was in a small restaurant in the business district on the east side of the island of Manhattan. So our lunches, we would regularly do 350 people on a Wednesday lunch. So really busy lunches, but dinners were slow. There's nobody in that part of town for dinners. So the restaurant, to survive, would rent out the space for catered events. So I would work the lunch rush on the line with the staff. And then I would stay those evenings and I'd work carving stations or pasta stations. And I get to interact with the guests. And from there, I moved back to Central Ohio, where I knew the demographic, I knew the people. And I spent some time at some really awesome restaurants here, the Refectory, Two Cheese, Bravo Brio Restaurant Group for quite a while. I ended up at COSI, the Center of Science and Industry, as their executive chef for 3.5 years. I opened a new dining facility for OSU. So lots of diverse experiences.
One of the things that I think is really cool since I've been doing this program and since I've been a part of MoreSteam is seeing how lean principles, continuous improvement principles are everywhere. You notice once you are made aware of these terms, aware of these concepts, you see them everywhere in your life. So I had to imagine that one of the places that you see all sorts of lean principles is the restaurant industry. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today. But first, I wanted to know that how did your experience as an executive chef influence your understanding and application of lean principles in your current role as the e-learning product manager here at MoreSteam?
Yeah, great. That's a good question. So what was really interesting for me is having spent 20 years in food service, and then what got me out of kitchens and into this role was the growth of my family. Having two little girls at home, but I just wanted to see more and
Right.
realizing that the 70 and 80-hour work weeks in the kitchen just wasn't cutting it for that.
Nights, weekends, and holidays in
Nights,
the
weekends,
restaurant
and
business.
every time anybody else goes out to party, that's where we work the hardest. So I was
Right.
missing all those opportunities for sure. So I reflected on the education I had from so many years ago, knowing that the industry had changed. I went and I did a coding boot camp for 14 weeks and then was able to get into MoreSteam, just a great opportunity. And the connections they just snapped and it was so nice. But once I got in and I started learning more about these lean principles, DMAIC, process improvement, I'm realizing I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I didn't have this vocabulary, this language, and this framework for it. So the idea that I took away immediately was that I just need to learn a different language. It's still English. It's just a different vocabulary. It's not really a different
Right.
language. So different vocabulary for all the things that we've been doing for so long. And that was a really eye-opening experience because that really lowered the threshold for me to get in and get really engaged and involved, because then it was just translation work of when I'm mise en place on a station. Oh, okay. So you're 5S'ing, like learning the right terminology for those lean practices. Yeah, that really was the game changer.
What were some of the biggest challenges you faced when implementing lean principles in your culinary career, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah. So there's always going to be challenges when you're trying to do anything different. Some of the biggest challenges that we had to face together in kitchens was really just making sure everybody understood the why. So some of the things that were interesting with the staff is like, wasn't we weren't using the terminology. I wasn't saying, hey, we're going to 5S this, or very rarely we're even saying mise en place to each other on the line. The idea
Uh-huh.
was we needed to communicate that if you line everything up correctly for our biggest selling items, then the amount of time you have to spend making that biggest selling item is going to be reduced. And if you can make the same thing over and over again consistently, the guest is going to be happy and they're going to come back and get it again. And so there was really the idea of explaining that if you can do it faster and you can do it consistently, and then we can do it better together, then everybody's going to win. So once the dining room is full, that's when all the bills get paid. So I think to answer your question about what were the biggest challenges is really just communicating the why to the coworkers that I was with. And the why being, we got to get the guests to be happy so they keep giving us their hard-earned money.
When I hear your answer to that, it takes me back to our recent Best Practices for Operational Excellence conference. And that was a theme at the conference explaining the why. To get that buy-in from everybody on the team, you really need to explain that why. Why are we doing this? And it can't just be because I said so.
Yeah,
Even if
exactly.
even if as a parent you want to say it, it's like that
So many
sometimes.
times you want to say it, right?
Restaurants often deal with significant food waste. And of course, waste is something we talk about in operational excellence, continuous improvement. We talk about waste all the time. So, how
Mhm.
did you apply lean methodologies to reduce waste in the kitchens during your career?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Food waste is always a consideration and it's always a challenge every restaurant has to overcome. It's not unique to any one particular unit or operation. So I had to see it all over the country and see it in a bunch of different operations. Some of the things that we were doing, that I was doing to help reduce that waste was, as I come to learn the right terminology, like we were forecasting demand. So going into a weekend, you're going to order more stuff. On a Monday and Tuesday, you're going to bring in less supplies. Being able to forecast based on historical data, like how much of what are you going to need, is a good, easy baseline to improve the reduction of waste in your operation. Now, you're still going to be peeling carrots and you're still going to have those peels. You're still going to have the tops off of carrots or the skins off an onions. That's not going to make it into the dish. So inherently with perishables, you're going to have waste. So what do is you find creative ways to use those. Those become stocks that are used in soups and sauces. Those become ingredients to new appetizers or a garnish on a salad. So all those little scraps and those things that are still usable materials, we were finding creative ways to reuse those. Lots of times it ended up being staff meal and we'd feed ourselves, which was a great way to incorporate more camaraderie and more teamwork when it was somebody working on an eggplant dish and they had all this extra eggplant left over. Okay, what can you make with that to feed us? And then we share ideas and recipes and bounce those off each other. So for the purpose of waste reduction, we would do a lot of just smarter ordering and better inventory control, like forecasting what was coming up based on the historic data that we already had. And then for that inherent, you're going to have some food waste, try to repurpose it. We made it happen.
Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, these principles are everywhere. You put them in action everywhere without necessarily knowing. And then you understand the terminology and the whys afterwards. Brian, can you share an example of a process improvement you made in a kitchen, either at a restaurant or at one of the institutions that you worked at, that had a significant impact on efficiency or cost savings?
For sure. Pretty regularly, when I would come into a new operation, with the experiences that I had, like the way I would approach it is first off, learn the current situation, learn the staff, what they're doing, what the menu is, what the guests really want, really need. Some of the process improvements we would do based on that would be on flow. Did quite a bit with not change your menu right away because you don't need this stark contrast that just makes things harder for everybody. But what I'm going to do is take how you're making this and make it faster or more efficient. An example being, when I was with COSI and took over as the executive chef, then looked at the menu that we had in the cafe. So we're feeding a bunch of kids and guests that are just they're not there for the food. They just need to keep going and enjoying all the great experiences that COSI had to offer.
Right.
So we want to so knowing that they're not coming to the cafe because they came to the cafe, they just need to eat before they can get back to playing. So we had to make that experience faster and better. So we would take things like the pizza that we serve regularly. And what they were doing is making enough for the day and then having it ready and firing pizzas when people would order. And then it takes 20 minutes to cook a pizza through a conveyor oven. And so that guest that wanted a whole pizza would have to wait 20 minutes. And at that point, you lost the kids' attention. Game over. Like, you're not going to have a good day with that. So we started, and I know batching is bad. I'm sure Ken's going to follow up on this one and say batching is bad, but we would start by having a pre-made batch of pizzas. So when we opened, we would have 3 pizzas ready. We would have 3 and we would sell 1. We'd have another one already in the oven. So we made a little buffer in how much pizza we had available, ready to sell, so that every guest that came in got the quickest order that they could. But we made sure that we kept that inventory really, really lean so that we didn't have 12 pizzas sitting there all day. And the last one's just going to be poor experience. So we worked really hard to look at what our peak flows were when the movies played, when the guests generally came in. And we made sure that we had a full inventory of ready to eat pizzas at those times.
I know this isn't a question so much about Lane, but it's something I'm curious about because COSI, you had the cafe experience, but COSI, you also had a lot of black tie affairs. You had catered events and big time events. So how did you deal with cooking for those big time events, those black tie catered events, as opposed to the cafe experience?
That's a great question. And that was one of my favorite aspects of working in that kitchen, because the layout of the building, the kitchen is right dead center in the building. And that was a prime position to be in. So we can serve the cafe, and that's mac and cheese and chicken tenders and burgers and pizza, because that's exactly what the guests of COSI wanted in that moment. But just like you're saying, we would also do 18, 19 weddings a year, lots of business events, catered stuff right upstairs, where we would be doing smoked scallops on prosciutto chips with apple puree. Like, we would be doing all these really black tie affairs, like you're saying. Some of the ways that we would manage that was really we'd call it now visual management. At the time, it was just a picture of what we needed. Didn't have that language for it, but we would know the cafe has this set par levels, things that they had to work for the amount of guests that were in the building at the time. But at a certain time, I had to have all of this ready. So we would have a bunch of different prep lists set up, knowing exactly when things need to be put into the oven or sauteed or made hot or plated or ready to go to the different parts of the building. Really was just a lot of visual management and making sure that we're communicating all of the time with the entire staff.
I always find that fascinating because you're dealing with 2 distinct and very different type of menus that you had to implement at the same time. Because I had been to engagements in COSI that were really fancy. Do people still say fancy?
Some high-end stuff happening there.
But then I also had been there multiple times with my daughter, and that's when she wants the chicken fingers and the mac and cheese. So thank you for answering that question for me, because that might only be an answer that satisfies me or I'm interested in, but this is my show, so there you go.
So there we have it.
I want to go back to some of our lean principles here, and you did even incorporate lean principles into what we had just talked about. But how do lean principles help maintain or improve food quality? And what specific techniques did you use to ensure consistency? We talked about that a little bit before, but if you can elaborate on that now, that'd be great.
For sure. I would say, specifically in kitchen and restaurants, standard work, standard work, standard work. We called them at the time recipes and prep lists. But it's really just standard work. The amount of time spent to develop a robust recipe that's going to be exactly what the guest wants every time, and then following through with that standard work, that was the way we drove quality control and quality assurance to make sure that everything was what it needed to be. So looking at the recipes, the standard work, we would know how much we needed to order to prepare that. We would know based on historic data how many of those dishes we were going to sell. And then we would be able to prep each of the ingredients that morning, put the correct measured tablespoon, ladle, whatever, into the dish so that in the moment when the cook has to make that item, you don't have to think. You just grab the handle of the teaspoon or the tablespoon that you need into the pan, you make the dish, and everything's already measured and ready to go. That way, with the recipe on hand, the standard work, we can even attach to that a picture of the final product. So any new cooks or on a different shift, everybody knew exactly what it was supposed to look like at the end. And so the guest always got the same thing every time. That really is what was the ticket to make sure that the quality was there.
Now, in what ways can lean practices optimize supply chain management? That's another thing we talk about a lot in continuous improvement, operational excellence is supply chain management. So in what ways can lean practices optimize supply chain management in the restaurant industry? And what were some of your experiences with that?
Yeah. We based everything on the historic data. We knew how much we were going to sell. So we would do a lot of, we call them PMIX analysis. So we look at how much of every item we sold on this Wednesday compared to last Wednesday to this Thursday. So we had a really good idea based on history, how much of what we were going to need to get through the next couple of days. So we would take that data and we would streamline the ordering process by forecasting how much we needed. But some of the things that we would be tempted to do is if you go to one source for ingredients, it's definitely going to be a leaner process. You're going to have one delivery truck to put away every day. But what that doesn't do is introduce the diversity for innovation. So we regularly we would have one service that would provide produce, one service that would provide meats. Now these would find the best specialists in that ingredients family. So a best meat provider, a best produce provider, and then a best groceries, so your freezer items and your paper products. And we would have them work together. We would place the orders such that we were placing one order to all of them and have the delivery show up at the same time so that we were just not having to always be disrupted by putting away another delivery, checking another order.
You did just mention innovation and that having multiple suppliers helps lead to innovation. Obviously, restaurants need to innovate to stay competitive. You stand with the same menu for 10 years, people are going to get tired of it potentially. So how do lean principles support innovation in flexibility in menu development and delivery of food to the guests?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you have a restaurant with a menu that doesn't change, you become a staple if you do it really, really well. But it's really hard to grow your client base if you don't change. So innovation is absolutely something that you would have to do every day in restaurants. And what we would do that turns out, what I've learned is a lean process is having those ideas of a standard process. So a leader standard work. How are we going to make a new menu item? And we would do this. And an example would be, we'd take just a small test batch. We'd make one of something. We taste it ourselves, like, needs this, needs that. We make a few tweaks and we give a nice voice to customer just in a small batch. We do a little feedback loop. We try it again. We'd improve the product. All right, now we have a better idea of what this is going to look like. We're going to run this as a special on a Friday and see how the guests like it. And just small batch. We're going to do a little bit, get some voice to customer, put that into a feedback loop, make it again, try it again. And we would do a few iterations of that, refining the process, refining the dish every time until we got to somewhere that everybody was happy. And then it would make it to the menu. So lots of times when developing a new menu, we'd be doing 4 or 5 of these test batches at the same time. So we have to keep track of what do we change here? What do we change here? Can we do anything differently or the same across each of these? And gathering that regular voice to customer and that little feedback loop of have the guest tell the server if they like it. The server comes and tells the chef, who tells the cook, who tells the prep cook, who orders different stuff. So there was a lot of that standard process, lots of voice to customer, because if the guest isn't happy, you're not selling anything.
I think this is a really fascinating look into the restaurant industry, especially when you think about these lean principles, because everyone likes to eat. Everyone likes to go to a restaurant. And if you could actually think about the lean principles behind everything, it's something, like I said, it's everywhere.
It is.
Really, really cool stuff, Brian. And one of the things I've been thinking about throughout our conversation, and I mentioned it before, was our recent Best Practices for Operational Excellence conference. Lots of different industries there. We had food service, healthcare, manufacturing, government. Based on your experience, what lessons from applying lean principles in the restaurant industry could be beneficial for other industries? Because one of the things at our conference that I saw was people learning from each other in other industries, different industries, and taking some of those principles back to their own industry. How could that work with the restaurant industry?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That conference was so good for that networking between a financial institution talking to a healthcare institution. They're tackling the same problems.
Right.
They just have different words for it. Just like in a restaurant, we're tackling the same problems. We just have different words for it. Thinking about the lean principles and how ubiquitous they are in everything we do. In restaurants, we may not be talking about 5S. Now, we lean practitioners know what that means now. But looking at a restaurant, we start talking about the concept of mise en place. So it's French term, everything has its place.
Thank you so much for explaining that because you said it now 3 times and I was like, what does that
What does that
mean?
mean? Yes.
So I'm glad you explained
Yeah.
that.
So mise en place, meaning like everything has its place. So one thing that we would do a lot in restaurants, especially when you're changing a menu or you're changing shift, maybe your lunch menu is different than your dinner menu. Frequently in restaurants, you'll find that there are these coolers to keep everything cold, which is important, but they'd be open at the top and you could have pans sitting on top. So the pans, the ingredients there would stay cold, but you could easily access what's going on, what you need, the ingredients you need to get to. The mise en place we would do between shifts, we take out the things that are on the lunch menu, but not on the dinner menu, get those put away correctly and put the dinner stuff up. So we would be sorting and organizing and making sure that all of our stuff that we needed the fastest and the most readily available was readily available quickly. Standard work is another lean principle that I think really applies everywhere. In coding practice, we have a lot of standard work here for how we test and review each other's work before it goes into the hands of the customer or the user. We want to make sure that the codes we write are robust and secure. So we have some standard practices for that. We have standard work for that. The way we gather feedback from our customers, absolutely, there's standard work for that. So standard work, leader standard work is not to be forgotten, is how do we operate? A chef has his own leader standard work. Maybe it's coming in the morning. Maybe the first thing you're doing is brewing coffee so that when the servers and the bartenders show up, it's ready for the guests. Maybe the first thing we're doing is turning on the ovens and the fryers. But every day, the chef in a restaurant has his leader standard work, the things he has to do, and that things that get done whenever he's not there, or she, whenever the chef's not there. So there's lots of those lean principles that apply across all industries. And it's really just understanding that the principle itself is the language and the guiding light that is to be adapted to fit the need that your industry calls for.
Brian just mentioned the guiding light. When I hear guiding light, the first thing I think about is the soap opera that was popular when I was a kid. But this is a podcast about continuous improvement and operational excellence, not soap operas. On Quality Time with MoreSteam, the young and the restless don't have to search for tomorrow. All the bold and the beautiful of process improvement is right here every 2 weeks. You know what's next. Like sands through the hourglass, please stick around for this short break. MoreSteam's enterprise process improvement platform includes the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. Our integrated approach featuring training, project tracking and execution, simulations, and statistical analysis empowers your team to create a culture where structured problem solving becomes second nature. Visit moresteam.com to learn more. And now back to my conversation with Brian Bross. Brian, obviously we've talked about the restaurant industry, lean principles, your journey to MoreSteam. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is how your culinary skills are used here in the office. You talked about feeding your fellow restaurant workers. You've also fed your fellow MoreSteam employees with some pretty good meals.
We have done that, huh?
Yes. Yes. Tell us about that. When was the first time when you brought your cooking skills to MoreSteam, and what was the reaction?
I'm so glad you asked me specifically about the first time, and I sure hope Peg is watching this.
Okay.
So when I started with the company, it became really well known right out of the gate that I was coming from the culinary world. At the time, MoreSteam would pretty regularly have cook-offs. They would have
Yes.
chili cook-offs, jambalaya cook-offs, grilling, that kind of stuff. So the first day I was in the office being introduced to the team, at the time, his name was Tim. Tim came in and handed me a sheet of paper and said, we forgot to give you this in your onboarding. It's our non-compete clause. And I looked at it, I was like, there's not a non, and everybody's kind of curious and around the room, like, we don't have a non-compete clause. I started reading it. And sure enough, Peg and Tim had taken the time to draft a non-compete clause for Chef Ryan not to compete in our cook-offs. So it was the best presentation. It was hilarious, like very well written. And there was a lot of laughter to be had. But I didn't sign that piece of paper. In fact, it is framed and hanging on the wall of my office right now. I have kept that because a few months later, we had our first cook-off and I contributed. I brought in a dish, and I don't mean to brag, and this may not be a surprise, but I absolutely won that cook-off. And that I think really pained Peg in a unique way because she, for those of you that know Peg, it's pretty competitive. And I think that was just a new day where Peg wasn't going to win every cook-off anymore. There's a new cook in the house.
Brian, you are definitely an outstanding cook.
Thank you, sir.
I have enjoyed your cooking on numerous occasions, and it has become now a tradition that the two of us, at the end of the summer, do the end of summer cookout together. And I don't want to toot our own horn, but toot, toot. I think it's been a success.
I think it's been a huge success. Yeah, I love it.
All right, fantastic. Brian, one other thing that you are known for throughout the office is that you are the king of dad jokes. Every day you've got more dad jokes than anyone else. So do you have a dad joke you would like to share with the Quality Time with MoreSteam audience?
Do I ever? Let me think. Hold on. So for a little bit of the backstory for those of you that aren't on our morning stand-up calls, every morning our team does a stand-up call, talk about what we did yesterday, what your victories were, what your challenges were, and then what you're working on today. We finish that call every day now with somebody delivering a dad joke. Now, because I do a lot of those, the team tries to come up with something or someone else to tell this dad joke just on the whim. But I always have one ready because every now and then, nobody else is taking the time to prepare. So I have one ready. And I think my question for you, sir, is what kind of boats do vampires use?
What kind of boats do vampires use? I don't know.
Blood vessels, sir. We're in October, so you got to stick with the Halloween theme.
Brian Bross, MoreSteam, eLearning product manager, a chef extraordinaire, dad joke teller. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Jen, this has been an absolute trip. I've loved this. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Also, please go ahead and visit our website, moresteam.com, to learn about the software and tools that can help you solve problems, eliminate waste, and do things better. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.